Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L, and now let's talk Knights and Magic episode 13, the last episode of this anime adaptation. So this is the final episode. This was the climax, so we can talk about it in terms of what did Knights and Magic do well, and how was this arc, and how good was the climax in general. That's gonna be like the things we're talking about. But of course, first, let's praise the episode for the little things it did do. So coming out of this arc, I think undoubtedly Oratio is one of the better characters that were presented here, I think, and he's also being set up as a recurring villain. Regardless, he is one of the better characters for this arc of Knights and Magic. And my favorite moment for the episode is when Ernesti launches oil at the ship and everyone's trying to figure it out, and Oratio just deadpan, just figures it out. It's oil. It's just, man, it was such a simple scene, but it was just so funny. I like Oratio a lot. And so anyway, the Knights and Magic episode, Ernesti versus a giant dragon, and towards the middle of the fight becomes more about Ernesti's aesthetics versus Oratio's design in general. And you know, what can I really say about the episode that we haven't already said about the previous episodes when the fight started? Again, the CG looks nice. The mechs look really good. The last ditch effort from Oratio to make a giant wyvern, that was pretty cool. Or sorry, a giant drake. My words are getting mixed up here. Yeah, giant drake. That was pretty cool. The fight going on the ground with the sword bro versus the shield bro, or Edgar versus the sword guy. That was pretty cool too, and I like that Edgar also ultimately was involved in one of the final hits, and that the prince also got involved. It's cool that he only uses blast howling, but hey, you know, have your characters doing something. Kid going in at the end and slashing at the final guy. Oh, you know, that was appropriate. That actually, like, in terms of the narrative there, I appreciate that. Like, Ernesti's villain is Oratio. Give Kid another villain, in this case, give him like that old man general, and let Kid deal with it, and it was nice. Towards the end of the episode, when you're looking at what Kid's doing, and you're looking at the characters that are talking to Kid, it kind of feels like he could be a protagonist here, especially with his words about, you know, gotta be better next time I meet the girl, and Elnora, and you know, she keeps doing her, she keeps being that kind of character. She gives Kid a hug from behind. Everyone else is watching it. I really thought that was cute and adorable, but yeah, Kid, he could double as a protagonist if it wasn't always Ernesti's show. But anyway, you have an established pacing for this arc, and you have it just continuing. It's pretty much continuing, and the most, I think, interesting thing here is probably coming out of Ernesti's rhetoric with Oratio, how Ernesti's talking about you have to have a philosophy behind it, you have to have the aesthetics behind it. And you know, Ernesti's big deal is he doesn't want the Drake to win, because then that's going to change the flow of technology for the future. And you know, that is a good enough motivation for Ernesti, because Ernesti's identity is based around robots. That said, I think Ernesti's argument, or his philosophy here, is not that great. I mean, I think Oratio has more behind it. I think Oratio is more correct. Oratio is pointing out a point of a weapon is power. Like, aesthetics don't really matter, whereas Ernesti is saying that that keeping aesthetics provides a philosophy, and Ernesti says, like, otherwise philosophy crumbles. And you know, he's just, again, defending it. Now, naturally, the narrative of the story is Ernesti ends up being correct, but this is more of a case where power makes right, so might makes right. So it doesn't really matter if the other party has a better point if they can't defend their point, if you're destroyed. So this is like one of the more brutish ways of making a point, is to just show the other person up by showing them they're incorrect, and or not showing them they're incorrect, showing them that it doesn't matter if they're right. It's more about just beating them into submission. That type of way of expressing a point, it gets pretty. It's interesting when you're considering it in fiction, because ultimately, you could always argue the character is right, because like we see what happens, but we know that it's being created by a writer, and the writer has his biases. And the question here is, like, when you look at the philosophies, does it hold up? Like, one of them feels more correct than the other, but because the narrative is saying, well, no, Ernesti's winning, that means Ernesti is right. You know, that's not the best way to set up your argument and win it when you're writing out your story. Does that make sense? I think I got mixed up there with my words a little bit. Point is, of that point, I think Oratio is more correct when it comes to the philosophy of what they're arguing about, but Ernesti, at the end of the day, has a better machine, and he has the better skill to make the machine work. So either way, you could still argue, well, Ernesti is still going to get his point correct, and is still agreeing with Oratio's point, because if Oratio's basing it all around power, then Ernesti, by virtue of defeating the Drake, has more power. So, you know, it's a little thing, but that's the most interesting part of the episode, I think. It's really that little like rhetoric that they have, that exchange. Otherwise, you know, after that, it's a pretty simple episode. A lot of it's fighting. You can't talk much about fighting other than just saying like, yeah, it was pretty cool that robots were hitting each other. Anyway, so as a climax, is this good? Was this a good climax? Well, I'm going to tell you, I think my opinion is very biased for that question, because I went through and I read some comments from the video sharing sites that had Knights and Magic up, and some people think, yeah, you know, it's a good series, it's a reasonable series, but that ending sucked. Why did that ending suck? Well, first off, we have to acknowledge this isn't a climax. This isn't like a true climax. Not in the sense that a 12 episode or a 13 episode run would have, because we have to remember they're adapting the end of a volume that pretty much, well, actually, I'm going to be very careful there. Like this whole arc with Zolodek, whatever the name of the country is, you know, it was introduced relatively late into the game. I think it was introduced at episode 9 or so. Episode 8 or 9, that's when we started with this arc, and so we're pretty much just ending an arc. We're ending mid-series of a light novel. When you look at that in terms of an adaptation, what it ultimately ends up being is that now you have this problem where the anime studio has to try and make a chapter end. They have to make a chapter end seem like it's the end of a series. They have to bring up the stakes like as high as they can. That's just not going to happen, just by the virtue that the story continues. Like there's bigger and better things happening in the future of Knights and Magic by the virtue that the light novel continues past this point. And so when you look at the other final elements of this episode, you have the treatment of the villains, Oratio and the sword guy. And this is especially more jarring when you consider that other villains in this series, specifically our girl that has no eye, that has the scar, she got like absolutely massacred by Edgar. Like she got like a very respectable ending, whereas you have our guys, the Oratio and Sword Bro, they're being treated as comedy elements. Like the sword guy's getting away on a wagon as our troop flies overhead, and he's doing the villainous thing of saying like, yeah, we're gonna make it past there, we're gonna get there, guys, we're gonna come back harder. And then you have Oratio playing like a Dr. Eggman, just following behind Ernesti like it's nothing. Just like, man, he's even using a telescope when he's right next. Okay, not the point. Point is, like, both characters are being treated as their comedy elements, and that does take away some impact for a final ending when you have, when you consider the treatment of other villains being a lot more brutal. So this would make sense, of course, in the volumes if they actually survived. Well, actually, no, I know they survive in the light novel, but when you have this here, you're just ending it off on like the story continues note, and maybe the way that they use those villains at the end does kind of take away a little bit the impact of the ending. That said, Oratio's set up for him to continue doing his thing. Sword Bro's set up to continue being a recurring villain, but what else is there? Like, again, Oratio was one of the bigger things of this arc, so him getting that treatment at the end, it's fitting for his character because he's a funny character in general. For the sword guy, it's just pathetic, and you know, what's the point of having your villain be that pathetic? He's comic relief now, he's not that big of a deal. I was surprised when I like the way that he survived though. Like his cockpit just got launched out. He's a cockroach, he can survive anything. But other points, Ernesti, we have a lot of the romantic tension between him and the girl, and they're all pointing out that the men in the order are dense. Whatever, romantic elements, doesn't matter. Ernesti's too into robots, so we're probably not going to get anything there. But overall, I can't think of anything else I really want to talk about. Ernesti gets a lab at the end. Ernesti talks about what he wants to keep making. We get ushered into the age of airships. It's not really anything beyond that. It's not really any big conclusive deals. And again, like if you were looking for conclusion with this ending, you were never going to get that from the very beginning by the virtue of what this is. This is more likely to get a season 2. Because of that, there's really no reason for it to have a very climactic ending. Really, fighting a giant dragon was a pretty cool climax in concept. So overall, I think Knights and Magic, I think it set a bar for itself, and it kind of pretty much stayed at a very consistent pace. I do think the best part of this series was back when Ernesti was developing his mech, when he was developing the new science, not new sciences, when he was developing the new technologies. After that, we have a lot of fighting episodes. We had this arc, which I think wasn't the best. I think the characters introduced, the vast majority of them, are pretty useless. I think Zalodek as an idea was cool, but any country that's always has a red moon behind it, it's probably just doomed to be like forgotten in the shadows of that moon whenever that moon's red light runs out. Like, overall, I'm glad we had Oratio pop up, but as we see in the end, Oratio doesn't even care about the country he was aligned with. He'll just sell his technology to another country, which again goes to prove that the overall threat of Zalodek wasn't there. They're not a big deal. The big deal was Oratio. And he's going to continue being relevant by moving around from country to country. So, yeah. Knights of Magic, I think it was a pretty cool robot anime. I think it was cool when the fights happened. I think it was neat when it came to the developing of the mechs. Everything else, it just kind of continues its pacing. The best fights, definitely the robot on robot. Robot versus monster was alright, but it took away a lot of the interesting conflict that we could have. In terms of this arc, Oratio and Ernesti's rhetoric was the most interesting draw. But after that, you know, I can't really think of anything else beyond it. Again, just note, my bias is I don't like this final arc all that much because I think a lot of elements in it were pretty stupid. Okay, I'm mostly talking about the princess, but I guess she's the queen now, but yeah, my bias is colored there. Like, she didn't do much for me. That said, another interesting element of Knights and Magic was the characters themselves. They didn't really get developed all that much beyond their introductory arc, and that was unfortunate because I think there's a lot to be enjoyed with the characters here. Instead, we focused a lot more on Ernesti's rhetoric, and especially with this arc, we had a whole episode with our main characters, or not a whole episode, we had a good chunk of our episode without our main characters, and it's just, you know, a lot of characters I think could have had more of their character scenes. I think we could have done with a lot more of it, but again, we still got so much content anyway, which just goes to show like this was a relatively dense adaptation. That said, like I think of characters like D, you know, he had his character arc kind of established during the first episodes of Knights and Magic, and then he sinks into the background, and by the time we're in this arc, the final arc for this anime adaptation, he seems like a much nicer guy, but we never really got to delve into that. We never got to delve into the whole issue with I guess the twins' family. We never got to see what actually caused a lot of the animosity that was present at the first episode. Like, let's remember, in the first episode, Ernesti was ready to jump at their sister's throat. He was ready to slaughter people. And that animosity is just, it's lost after a point. Because for Knights and Magic, the characters very quickly became secondary. Edgar as well, he also lost his relevance, and he only like got back his relevance when he was fighting an appropriate villain. He didn't really have any other point where he had to really show up. The prince was just there to say blast howling a lot and to establish relationships with other foreign nobles. The kid's sister, Adel, I think, she was just there for comic relief and to keep pointing out that Ernesti's dense. Like, look at this episode. How often was she pointing out Ernesti's density? It's things like that, right? So it's unfortunate. Oh, and Edgar's friend, who apparently also likes him, most likely. Yeah, what did she get in terms of development? Not much. We just got told these are really good characters and these characters are competent, but we never got to see how they became competent. Nora, from the Order of the Azure Hawk, she was a competent character from the get-go. We unfortunately didn't find out much about her, but we know she's freaking competent. So it was this issue of like the characters became really competent, but we never got to see their journey from 0 to competent. And that's unfortunate. That's a bit unfortunate. It was again all Ernesti and Oratio for this last arc. But that's Knights and Magic. That was something that we knew. Well, actually we didn't know about the character thing happening until we got like a few arcs in. So yeah. Anyway, Knights and Magic. I think it was alright. Would I recommend it to other people? It depends. If you like robot anime, maybe. If you like the idea of the Otherworld series, the Isekai series, or genre, sorry, yeah. If you're just a casual viewer though, just kind of wanted to see something cool, it depends. If you like a lot of action, I'll definitely suggest this one for you, but if you don't, I think there are better anime out there. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Those are my thoughts. Leave any thoughts down below if you have any, and till next time, I hope you have a great day.